Building a fortune in the billions of dollars requires a lot of secrets to be kept under wraps. Or at least Hitler can say the same for himself. Adolf Hitler had an enormous fortune. About $13 billion worth of Hitler's illicit money was stashed in several Swiss banks. So if there's anything that can be said about his wealth, well, it can be evaluated in part by the fact that he had been exempt from paying income tax on his salary and other income ever since 1935 till the very end of his life. And even before he came to power, Hitler had secretly stashed millions of dollars abroad, owned multiple Mercedes-Benz limousines, and had a net worth in the millions. But just how rich was he? And what allowed him to become so rich? Here's everything we know. If not already evident, Adolf Hitler's desire to earn an immense fortune can be traced back in large part to his impoverished beginnings. You see, Adolf Hitler was a young man who lacked focus and purpose in his life. His poor health and academic performance also majorly contributed to his eventual destructive attitude towards life, where the constant nagging from his family and Hitler's lack of focus further fed his already existing hatred and self-destructive tendencies. Even then, his father really wanted him to become something. As a result of the kind of circumstances that surrounded him, the future dictator's relentless pursuit of a fortune that would allow him to live lavishly led him down a road of fraud and deception. Throughout, Hitler's political career was funded by the proceeds of numerous illegal acts committed while he was in charge of the Nazi Party. The German dictator had a reputation as a cunning tactician who used his greed to steal from businesses, individuals, and even his own government, leaving no stone unturned. If anything, Hitler loved money. In fact, he loved money so much that that was the only thing that really caught his eye. Well, except for the Jews. Anyways, avoiding that lane altogether, let's explore exactly how did his love for amassing such wealth really begin. According to various reports over the years, Hitler collected a large fortune, given that he valued the material comforts it provided and the loyalty it gained him. That's right. Since Hitler's suicide on April 30th, 1945 in his Berlin bunker as the Soviet army drew in, he has been the subject of enduring fascination. But until recently, his personal finances have received very little study. But despite his public image of rigidity, Hitler enjoyed the finer things in life. For instance, not so long ago, it was revealed that Ingo Helm, a 47-year-old freelance journalist and filmmaker, spent almost a year making Hitler's money on a state-owned broadcaster, ARD, claiming that Hitler paid close attention to his money from his own writing and from the copyright fees for his images. And although Hitler had a tiny inheritance, he spent much of his life before World War I as a struggling artist in Vienna. Of course he felt ashamed of his financial situation. But as fate had it, in Mein Kampf, which would make him millions, he emphasized the upstart who had risen by his own efforts from his previous position in life to a higher one, which kills all pity and destroys feeling for the misery of those who have remained behind. In fact, Hitler actually spent millions on expensive gifts and payments to politicians and business people to keep them centered on him and in his sphere of influence. Interestingly, by the early to mid-1930s, Hitler had amassed a fortune estimate at several $1 million. The tax records show that the year he assumed power, he made almost 1.2 million Reichsmarks annually. So, how about that? Yet, Hitler appeared to be completely dedicated to the welfare of his party, the people, and the fatherland from the outside looking in. But millions of cash were available to the Führer behind the scenes. It is said that early in his ascent to power, Hitler was financially supported by wealthy supporters like industrialist Fritz Thyssen, who gave him hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks, or several $1 million. Whereas several gifts to Hitler included parcels of land designated for the construction of Nazi youth residences. But since Hitler was divorced and never had children, the Allied Control Commission distributed his estate and assets to the state of Bavaria after the war. This included the home in Munich that he had constructed for Eva Braun. For those of you who are unaware, German photographer Eva Ann Paula Hitler was Adolf Hitler's lifelong companion and briefly married wife, though their romance was short-lived and eventually resulted in divorce. Anyway, about the income tax situation though. Nazi leader Adolf Hitler did not have to report the roughly $13 million in earnings he made from the sale of his book Mein Kampf, since he was exempt from paying personal income tax as Reich Chancellor. According to the last surviving document from the NSDAP publishing company Franz Ayer Nachwolde GmbH, Hitler's credit balance at the end of 1943 was 5.5 million Reichsmarks, which is about $71 million today. On top of that, after the war's end, Hitler's account balance at the Berchtesgaden Savings Bank was discovered to be around 92,000 Reichsmarks following the 1948 reform of the German currency. The Bavarian State Office of Property Administration even reported in 1949 that beyond this, Hitler's other assets were not known. Moving on, Franz Ayer, the publishing house that Hitler paid 7 million Reichsmarks to have Mein Kampf published, had kept all of that money. Additionally, Hitler possessed a number of exceedingly expensive estates, most notable of which was the Berghof, located on the Obersalzberg and constructed with approximately 1 billion Reichsmarks in tax money. Similarly, about 14 Führer headquarters were reportedly built during the war, so there's that. More importantly, several $1 million worth of art was stored in Hitler's opulent home in Munich's Prinzregentenstrasse, where rumour has it that the majority of the artwork in the collection had been stolen from various locations around Europe. A thief and a billionaire, quite a combo if you ask us. While it's true that Hitler's riches were bolstered in part by looted artwork and wire transfers, a lot more was happening with his actual source of income. You understand that Hitler's official salary didn't even come close to covering his living expenses. That's because he was able to increase his financial stability thanks to three primary sources of income. For one, in the 1920s, the NASDAQ regularly faced insolvency due to the lack of funding that was only partially remedied by donations from party royalists. Hugo and Elsa Bruckmann, Munich-based publishers, and Helen Bechstein, wife of Berlin's most well-known piano builder, contributed significantly to Adolf Hitler's wealth. The Bruckmanns were charged with introducing Adolf Hitler to powerful businessmen. Secondly, a personal secretary, chauffeur, and numerous massive Mercedes automobiles were already within Hitler's financial reach, even when he was still a subtenant until 1929. As a result, the publication of Mein Kampf in 1930 substantially improved his financial status. Then again, in 1931, sales of the book were only above 20,000. But by January 1933, they jumped to 287,000. By the end of the year to 1.181 million, and by the end of 1944, in Germany alone, they had reached 12.45 million. For each of these books sold, Hitler received a royalty of up to 20% of the retail price. And by 1939, 5.2 million copies had been sold in 11 different languages. Still, Hitler was unable to accumulate a 6 or even a 7-figure fortune despite this. Meanwhile, some of Hitler's immense wealth came from donations, but the incredible fraud he pulled off was primary source of his wealth. For example, the Reichspost, commonly known as Imperial Mail in German, began charging Hitler royalties in 1933 for the rights to his own picture on postage stamps. So everyone who used a German stamp, and there were many as Hitler appeared on many, effectively contributed to Hitler's regime. Not to forget, propaganda minister and flamboyant bureaucrat Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary that Hitler made a lot of money with his plan, given the scheme earned Hitler tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of cash over the years. After some time, the Adolf Hitler Fund of German Trade and Industry, a multi-million-dollar annual fee on large corporations that began in 1933, had replaced private donations both in cash and jewelry due to the economic crisis. Larger businesses set aside 0.5% of their profits on the off chance that they'll receive orders for military equipment, so the fund grew to 700 million Reichsmarks over the course of 12 years. Hitler was able to buy everything he wanted in Obersalzberg with these funds. The question is, where did he even stop? Which we know he didn't. That said, the question that remains now is, what did Hitler even do with all that money? Spending in the millions went on mansions on the Obersalzberg and in Poznan, as well as presents and the promotion of German art. But that wasn't all. It is estimated that 1 billion Reichsmarks was spent on the extension of the Berghof, which includes bunker facilities, barracks, and the departure of the Reich Chancellery, or $5.32 billion as of today. Of course, it was highly expensive to build additional barracks and the utility infrastructure at Hitler's Berghof mountain retreat, as well as the Berchtesgaden Chancellery branch office, an alternative headquarters for employees. But given the money he'd gathered, the original holiday home was completely renovated into a luxurious mansion. The house focal point was a huge living room with a panoramic window that could be rolled back out of sight. Money spent on Hitler's bunkers in Obersalzberg and the Kelstenhaus, a tea house on top of the Kelstein with its own road and tunnel and a 407-foot-high elevator, totaled 1 billion Reichsmarks, where the majority of the money for this came from the state's general revenue, as evident. Now, there's one more thing you need to know. During World War II, the Nazis stole vast amounts of gold and other valuables from the countries they conquered to satisfy Hitler's rabid appetite for power, riches, and supremacy. And again, the Nazi conquest of Europe were not just about expanding their territory, but also about making money. For instance, a major component of their plan to fund the war and maintain their opulent lifestyle was the systematic robbery of gold, rare stones, and valuable artifacts from seized regions. Some countries even had their whole national treasures stolen from them, leaving them bankrupt and unable to preserve their culture. Additionally, the Reichsbank gold holdings were often cited as an example of Nazi gold hoarding at its worst. During the Nazi occupation of countries like Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, they plundered their national gold reserves. The stolen wealth was also crucial in maintaining the war machine, funding military battles and building gigantic facilities like those Hitler envisioned for Germany. Beyond that, the Nazis planned and executed a massive scale of plunder of Jewish property throughout the Holocaust, where gold, jewels, and artwork were among the many valuables stolen from Jewish households and communities. At the end of the day, these stolen funds were deposited into Nazi bank accounts, strengthening Hitler's financial might. Anyway, in 1948, after the currency reform, the state of Bavaria received a fraction of the roughly 10 million Reichsmark that had been Hitler's legacy. To this day, it is unclear whom Hitler bequeathed his possessions in the private will he drafted in the Führer bunker just before the war's end. But one thing is for sure, whatever and however way he could, Hitler made sure he had all the money in the world and more. And while that's all for today, do subscribe to our channel so that we can let you in on more of such secrets and videos, those that are nothing but interesting.